Welcome to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire, with your host, Steve Yates.
Welcome to the China Desk Podcast. I'm your host, Steve Yates, Senior Research Fellow for China and National Security at the Heritage Foundation. A reminder to our audience for whom we are most grateful. Viewers can watch the China Desk on YouTube or subscribe to hear all our interviews on Apple, Spotify, and most other podcast providers. We welcome you to check out our website and show archive at ChinaDeskPodcast.com. My guest today is Denis Mandich, CTO and co-founder of Decrypt. He focuses on quantum security, research and development, post-quantum encryption algorithms, and standards bodies. He holds several patents in cryptography, cyber technologies, and information processing. Denis is a founding member of Quantum Economic Development Consortium, a founding member of Mid-Atlantic Quantum Alliance, an industry advisor to Center for Quantum Technologies, and an advisor to Quantum Startup Foundry, and a former board member of the quantum chip manufacturer QSide. Before joining Decrypt, Denis served 20 years in the U.S. intelligence community, working on national security projects, cyber infrastructure, and advanced technology development. But with that, Denis, welcome to the China Desk. Let's jump in.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, I think you have now the coolest biography of any of our guests with respect to all of our other guests, just in terms of the things that are in the headlines today that are at the intersection of technology and security. So really, really welcome guest and topics to hit at. But as I warned in our pre-show, we'd like to talk a little bit about what got you into this kind of place in life. When you were going to school, did your teacher say, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And you said, "I'm going to know about post-quantum cyber"?
No, it's a circuitous path to get here. I was in grad school. I'm a physicist studying string theory, and I was looking for a job for teaching someplace, and I just happened upon an ad in the Wall Street Journal about a job in the intelligence community. Hit all these check boxes. Do you speak these foreign languages? I'm originally from Croatia, so I spoke Croatian and Russian. And I'm also very familiar with nuclear technology. So I answered the ad. I'm like, well, this is never going to go anywhere. Of course, they called me, got an interview, was hired pretty quickly, and ended up, thinking, oh, I'll do this for 3 or 4 years. And 20 years later, I saw what was actually happening in the world. And what really struck me is what was happening to the national economy here, the transfer of wealth out of the U.S. into other places. And I thought that was unsustainable. And it was really based on the theft of IP. And actually, at the time, General Alexander said it best. He was the head of the NSA. He said, this is the single largest transfer of wealth from one country to another. And we don't know if we survive this and where it goes. And I felt that we could bring together a solution after I retired from the IC that would be available to everyone and would make everyone more secure and preserve our future, our national economic security.
Well, that's a pretty compelling arc of experience and kind of the narrative of the world that we live in. I had somewhat of a similar entry point where I'd made an application and I had a critical language, but that's where my skills ended. So you had a couple of other things where they said, not only do I want to talk to him, I want to talk to him now. That might have gotten things moseying along for you. But if having Croatian, Russian, and nuclear, I would assume engineering or physics background in that is how you got in, how does that connect with some of the post-quantum computing and cyber stuff that you're dealing with now? I mean, not all science is as accessible by these things. I know I started out with mathematics and other kinds of things, and I found my boundary of comprehension pretty clearly. But you've made a pretty cool arc from the hard sciences into the cyber world.
Yeah, it didn't start out that way because in the intelligence community, they were mostly interested in the 1990s in the proliferation of nuclear weapons, nuclear technologies, and so on. And I, of course, have a deep understanding of that. And I had the ability to learn very quickly what I did not know on the classified side. And then fast forward to today and the years before I was retiring, we saw the rise of quantum computers, which is a game changer for all of humanity if they scale any larger. And we also recognized the threat, and understanding that threat was really about understanding how quantum mechanics works and how these things happen in the classified environment. Of course, on the government side, black projects and so on, there's science fiction level technologies that people would never believe exist. Of course, not talking about UFOs or anything like that. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. But those kinds of surprises happen when you have national labs and huge amounts of budgets to get to something. And that's really where my interest in this space came in, is that I wanted to not just secure corporate infrastructure so that my kids don't end up working for Huawei one day. I really wanted to kind of continue my development and stay in physics. I'm a physicist by background. I want to continue in quantum, and cryptography was a way to do that. Quantum computing side, super interesting. It's definitely the future, but I really wanted to stay in that security aspect of it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in here that I want to try to get to, but one thing that I don't want to leave out of the sort of preamble of all of this is we are the China Desk, and we talk about things that end up looking at the unique many angles of opportunity and challenge with China, but with a hard look at the challenges. As you were kind of evolving in your career, I mean, it sounds like you were getting recruited at a time when there was a Cold War underway, and the number one defined threat to American security and our way of life was the Soviet Union. Then we all went through what we thought was a post-Cold War peace dividend, only to maybe have another strategic rival emerge. Maybe it was emerging before we focused in on it. At least that would be my way of putting it. But for you, as you were doing your work, I mean, you came in with some Russian language ability and looking at nuclear things. Of course, China has a nuclear program too. What kind of was the evolution of looking at China and how it presented an interest or a concern to you?
Yeah, I think the core way to think about them, the Russians, Soviets, and Chinese, is that they don't have the same worldview. And when we project our vision of the world on them and what they are doing operationally, it never works. So simplistically, you can think of it as we always think about growing the economy, making the pie bigger for everyone, getting everyone in, working together, and making it better. They 100% think of it only one way. It is a zero-sum game. If the United States gets richer, they are poor. They never think about it as the pie being bigger. And so when everyone complains that, okay, the CIA or NSA spy on them too, it's not for the same reasons. They're spying using their government agencies to steal IP that they can operationalize and monetize in their countries to make Ant or Huawei and these other companies richer. We can never do that on the US side. We do it for a completely different reason, to protect ourselves strategically against military and diplomatic threats and for other reasons. Very different on their side. Their side is that this is a global economic issue and there can only be one superpower, and that has to be them, not us. So the perspective is completely different, and there's nothing that we can do to really change that. That has to come internally from their side, and I don't see that happening anytime.
Yeah. And over the course of your journey in government, but then also you have a post-government life, when did you sort of sense that the balance of your work was starting to get to be more focused on Asia than it was Eurasia?
It was definitely in the 2010s. Prior to that, it was the GWOT, the Global War on Terror, and lots of other things that we thought might bring everyone together and kind of unify things and grow the pie for all of us. 2010s, it was clear when I had deep visibility into what they were doing, the theft and penetration that they had of all of our biggest companies with the sole goal of not improving them and making them better. It was purely for theft and taking over a lot of that business and making them Chinese businesses. And that was China. It was not, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and so on. It was China. And so understanding that threat was only evolving and getting bigger and never, reaching an equilibrium of some kind, I really felt that we had to do something about it. And it wasn't enough just to get better encryption and these other technologies. It had to be a whole of US government effort involved in it. And I really do think that we're getting there now. We weren't there 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was still very delusional, head in the sand.
Well, I definitely welcome the reassuring message that we're getting there, at least in a more effective way now. My sense is this is going to be something that's constant gardening, constant work. We're going to have to really be focused, committed, and to be able to stay ahead in these areas. And I'd love to get your sense of kind of what we need to be doing by way of public policy to encourage and reward where we can the right kinds of education, the right kinds of professional experience. We're dealing in fields where, you had knowledge of physics. That's not something that people pick up as a hobby for the most part. They tend to get that from school. But there's a lot that's being done in programming and other areas that there are people who are wizards without actually the formal education. It's practical experience. So getting that mix, I think, is an interesting challenge. And in recent years, as you've been trying to rally this pretty advanced tech way of protecting our way of life, what's been the mix of the kinds of people you've seen as adding greatest value?
It's the people with that technical background which we're suffering from in the United States right now. I went into physics because I was always interested in it as a child, but fewer people go into this space today, and the majority of them are overseas now. We need a lot more physicists to build a quantum industry here in the United States. AI, we've got hundreds of thousands of engineers and developers that could work on that. That's a solved problem as far as I'm concerned. Quantum is a much different story. That's specialized skills, that's deep knowledge of quantum mechanics and things like that to make any improvement in those systems. I can say that I spent a lot of time with the government just in the last few weeks. I testified at Congress a few weeks ago. We had the quantum technology showcase at Congress last week. This is fully bipartisan supported across the board. Everyone sees this as a technological race with the Chinese and everyone else. They're going to get legislation and funding through the Big Beautiful Bill contained a lot of that. And I'm very hopeful. National Science Foundation has multiple programs to build up our base of technical experts. In China, it's almost hard to believe how they have centralized that process. And they're building that next generation of people in quantum information sciences and centralizing it in a single location in Anhui province. That we don't have anything like that here. We need to get on board with that and encourage people off TikTok and becoming influencers to become real scientists that can do this.
Well, I can only say amen to that, but let's pivot into our education. So you're the brains of this conversation at this point. But we've thrown out some words that are frequently in the news that people probably have a glancing understanding of. But maybe talk to us about what are quantum technologies and why are they important to the United States and why should we be wary of China advancing in them?
Well, the main pillars of the quantum industry are quantum sensing, which is, for example, being able to figure out where you are in the world without GPS satellites. Quantum secure communications, which is what crypt does, which is the type of comms, whether it's a session like this or messaging or any kind of data transfer that's immune to attacks by quantum computers. And then there's quantum computing. All of these fundamentally use some quantum phenomena to be able to achieve that technological goal. They're all very different. In quantum computing, it's a very hard challenge, and there's lots of ways to make the basic unit for a quantum computer, which is called a qubit. In regular computers, cell phones, and so on, there's a transistor, which generates a 0 or a 1, a single bit for computation. Qubits can exist in many different states, a 0 or a 1. The reason why that's important is because as you add one more logical qubit, you double the power of the computer, which grows exponentially fast, unlike a regular computer where you need twice as many transistors to achieve the same level of computation. So that's why so much money is going into this and so much effort. It's hard to, in a short conversation like this, to explain quantum physics and a little bit of what's behind that. There's lots of videos on superposition and entanglement that you can see on YouTube. But fundamentally, these systems operate very differently from classical systems. It's a little counterintuitive. It takes some time to absorb, but any first year quantum student in an undergraduate program gets it. And I think we can get a lot more people involved in it. Maybe not as deeply as the people working on quantum computers, but at some level in this industry.
Well, with China, you've warned that they may have a deep seek moment in quantum computing, potentially powered by stolen IP. So, how close
Hmm.
do you think they are to that kind of a breakthrough, and what would it mean for our national security?
Yeah, it's a long question, but I'll say one thing that I'll front load this with. Science is not a democracy. Everyone's opinion and vote doesn't matter at all. And only the people making quantum computers know when we call it Y2Q or Q day, when quantum computers get big enough, scale to the point where they can break all of our encryption. We don't know when that day will be, and only the people making those systems actually know that. And many of those companies and researchers are in China. And there's no incentive for them to disclose that kind of a technological advantage as a nation state operating the largest intelligence apparatus in history. That's the protection of sources and methods, which is paramount over any collection requirement. They'll use that to steal IP, cryptocurrencies, and everything you can think of. There's no incentive for them to announce the way they did with DeepSeek that they have a big enough quantum computer to read all of our emails. And that, I think, is coming in the next 3 to 5 years, but we will not publicly know about it. I think people forget that, OpenAI and ChatGPT has been around for many years. No one cared about it until about 2022 when ChatGPT 3 came out. When ChatGPT 3 came out, OpenAI said, we're so far ahead of everyone, no one can ever catch up, China or anybody else. 1 year later, DeepSeek was founded as a company, and shortly after that, they produced a model that was just as good as OpenAI when they didn't even exist as a company before that. We can anticipate the same thing is going to happen in quantum. Again, we just won't know about it, and the consequences are in many respects catastrophic for our digital security.
And when it comes to encryption, and you apply this kind of computing, basis of cryptography and encryption is, the encryption allows you to create some kind of a code that is unique enough that it's very hard for someone else to guess or to compute and crack. And we've done a lot of complex encryption that should be very, very safe. But just correct me if I'm wrong, but in layman's terms, once you have quantum computing applied to this, you just have so many more computes going on at once that it's like someone turning a Rubik's Cube in like a tenth of a second and being able to solve it immediately. But this is a gigantic Rubik's Cube that can be solved in that speed. And so no banking information is secured. Nuclear weapons launch codes are not secured. Diplomatic negotiations and consultations are not secured. So, in the crudest way of putting it, the kimono is completely wide open, and now you only have power and trust at that point. Am I wrong?
No, that's right. And I'll make it even worse for you because your audience is not going to be blackpilled enough after this. But I call it retroactive insecurity because all the data that's ever been harvested, it's called harvest now, decrypt later, that's already been harvested can now be decrypted and operationalized. So for us, transitioning to post-quantum cryptography is an immediate requirement because the more data that we generate that's not using what we believe to be quantum safe algorithms, the longer we're going to suffer that problem. And people forget that this has been going on since decades long into the Cold War. We're still sitting on Soviet data from the 70s and 80s that we would love to decrypt with quantum computers once we get them online and still operationalize that. There's spies that we have here in the United States and other places that we have their communications. We just don't know who they are. Once that happens on our side, we can operationalize it very quickly. But again, China's goals are very different from that. And the way quantum computers work, they solve that specific class of problems on which we built our digital security, the encryption systems there. And although we do have some what we believe to be quantum safe algorithms, there's no proof that that's true. We're just very hopeful. It's a little bit of, magic dust here that we don't know if this is better or worse than what we're using now. And we're just hopeful that we will be secure. But if, history is our guide, all these systems are eventually broken. The government has told us, look, be crypto agile because we have no proof that these ones that we're transitioning to are secure. And if they aren't, and if a break is found in the coming years, we need to be able to turn that switch and swap them out very quickly. And that's called crypto agility. Last point on this is that there was a frightening moment in this new standards process where NIST was running a competition to find the new key encapsulation algorithms that we're talking about here. There were two main, very strong finalists. One of them was broken by a regular laptop computer, and that was about to be standardized. We only have one left for this key encapsulation piece. If that breaks by a quantum computer and all guns are trained on this one algorithm now worldwide, we're in a very dark place. That is truly a black swan moment where that's broken and we're not prepared.
Well, that is pretty terrifying, but this whole subject matter is going to be terrifying in a certain sense if you take seriously how slow we are to this dance. And you have correctly outlined that China faces no such hindrance. One of the blessings of modern high-tech authoritarianism is that they are rolling ahead with no roadblocks. But as we think of workforce, but also risks, you've been candid about China's use of U.S. universities to train the quantum workforce. How should Americans rethink how they handle foreign students in STEM fields? And kind of the same question for how should American industry in a private sector be thinking about their kinds of interactions with these kinds of professionals?
Yeah, the operating assumption has to be that, look, these people are at risk, whether they came here with the intention of spying or they'll be recruited afterwards by the Chinese intelligence services to work for them, either under duress or on a voluntary basis. We have to always consider that with these foreign students until they're vetted at a very high level. And there's never a week that goes by that the FBI isn't catching some of these people doing something extremely nefarious, fully operationalized by China and deployed to the United States. We're in a situation today where the entire history of humanity, there have never been that many intelligence officers collecting in the United States as anywhere in the world, including the entire Cold War by the Soviets. We've never had that many people here at once. And in a very sophisticated shotgun approach, they'll take anything, anywhere, at any time. And that just keeps rolling forward. We need to do something about that. We have educated almost everyone in the entire world for decades now at the leading quantum institutions in the United States. They've gone to build the programs in their own countries, and that will become self-sustaining over time. We're at risk now, which is a concern in Congress, where a lot of scientific and research academic programs are being defunded by the government, which that's rightfully so for some very wasteful spending that we've done. That should not affect the quantum industry. And I see that I'm very hopeful that that will not, because there are zero US companies today in the quantum industry that are not built on academic and national lab research. And that includes IBM and everybody else. All of those fundamental pieces were done on the non-commercial side on which we all built our companies, including Crypt.
Yeah. So maybe go a little bit deeper into the well-known political issue that pops up when people say, "Oh, well, you're trying to target certain people. Are you saying we shouldn't have Chinese people being students and researchers in STEM programs?"
No, we should definitely have them here, but there should be greater vetting. And I can think of very clear examples of we knew the people going to the universities were sent here by the MSS. They still got visas. They still came and worked at those universities. The belief system at the time was, look, they're not working in classified. They didn't do anything wrong. It was not illegal what they did. The fact that they're collecting open source information is not of concern. The reality is that they're not just collecting that open source information and sending it back to China. They're collecting assessment data on targeting scientists that are working in classified programs, that are in academia, trying to invite them back to China for meetings where their devices could be exploited. They could be targeted for recruitment. This is a very sophisticated long-term operation. It's not just a one and done. They either got access to classified, exported it or not. That's not how this works.
I think that's a really, really important point, because I think the conversation on trying to set standards and have vetting and counterintelligence measures in place has been very stale since the end of the Cold War. There's only been sort of the nuclear labs getting, all of a sudden here's a professor that starts leaking some information here or there and makes a headline. But you've made the very important point too, that just in terms of the quantity of people that are being thrown at us with the specific mission, it's not a question. They have been thrown at us in these very high numbers. It's something we've never seen. And the technology they have at their hands to do it is a force multiplier for them, which if you put those two pieces together, we're really in some ways outmatched if we're not very careful. I went to college a long time ago, and there were a lot of foreign exchange students from China in the physics and engineering departments. They had entire discussion sessions of those majors that were exclusively not just in Mandarin Chinese, but in Beijing accented Mandarin Chinese. So that has existed for decades. But what you're describing and what we're talking about now is actually several orders of magnitude bigger than that, correct?
Absolutely. And I went to grad school with plenty of Chinese students who had zero intention of ever going back to China. They were facing poverty and forever unemployment there and no life. They just want to become Americans. Fast forward to today, that is not the case. China has changed the dynamic there to entice people to come back to China after they've had a successful collection career here in the United States. And again, my belief is that the government should double down, triple down, so on funding the FBI and our counterintelligence agencies to prosecute and find these people. And in almost all of those services, the payback that we get by saving the future economic potential of some companies and other endeavors that we have here in the US will pay for itself over time. You should not be able to be promoted in federal law enforcement if you have not discovered a Chinese operation or Chinese spy in the United States. If they're finding some, minor thing to get promoted, some stock scam or something like that, that should not be able to get you promoted in the Federal Counterintelligence Service. You must be able to prosecute at least one individual and find one of these operations nationally, because as you said, we are outnumbered. This is a much bigger problem than we can deal with the numbers that we have in law enforcement today.
Well, and if it matters, it should matter in how people advance. That's another good point. So we've talked a lot about where some of the glass half empty issues are in front of us. Let's try to fill in a little bit of the glass half full parts. I mean, do we have any asymmetric advantages, the U.S., our allies, in quantum technology that China can't easily replicate or steal?
Yes, there are quite a few of those that are indigenous to the U.S., and the government, through many questionnaires that everyone in the quantum industry had to answer, has limited exports to China for those technologies. Everyone's aware that NVIDIA can't export their latest generation Blackwell processors to China for advancing their AI industry. There are parallels to that in the quantum industry. They're not as simple to explain, as sexy as gaming GPUs being sent to China, but they're technologies that are absolutely essential for building quantum computers and other quantum technologies that Decrypt builds.
I think it's really, really important that we sort of keep that tally, and hopefully we remain an engine of excellence in those areas. Another area that kind of comes up a lot in U.S.-China conversations, but really interested in your take on it in this field. It's psychological operations and disinformation. In some ways, there could be announcements from China that they've achieved some kind of a breakthrough or a capability, but that is, as might be the case in some intelligence reporting, it's meant to influence more than to inform. And so as you look at this quantum space in particular, what are you seeing in terms of the role of misinformation and deception, perhaps?
Yeah, I think Chinese propaganda and efforts in the space are kind of laughable and transparent, really pedestrian. It might make sense to some Communist Party official in an echo chamber in the bowels of MSS headquarters, but we kind of laugh at it here, right? So I'll give you an example. They'll publish through some third tier university that they've broken our latest version of post-quantum cryptography or something else like that. It's very quick that we and our professionals in our industry can figure out that this is obviously nonsense. And again, as you said, it's meant to influence as well as to inform. The bigger picture in which that falls is to sow distrust in US technology and to try to export China as the center of excellence for all these technologies in the future. Of course, that's failing. That's self-delusion inside China where they believe that that's true, but nobody believes that on the outside. And certainly when it comes to that type of research, they have outstanding researchers there who do great work, and everyone knows who they are, and they're not going to damage their global reputation in these quantum spaces by being part of the propaganda machine. Whereas there's plenty of other people in their university and patent system that are happy to publish nonsense all day long. Look at the number of Chinese patents and research papers. They're just generally gibberish and garbage that was assembled by somebody trying to get promotion or grant money in China. None of it's credible or believable. However, I'm going to caution that there's that level that's as good as ours. Those people are just as smart as us, and they're trying to do good work.
Yeah, well, we'll have a lot of fog to try to sift through, and no matter what area we're dealing with China on, I just think the stakes in this particular field are probably higher than the average. There's a concept out there, we've alluded to it, maybe talked about it a little bit along the way, quantum supremacy. Now, I think I can deduce just from reading English what this likely means, but if you can help educate a little bit about what is that kind of a threshold? How would we know? And if China were to get a notion of quantum supremacy over the United States, what do you think would be their kind of first move? Economics, surveillance, something else entirely? Just playing games here.
Oh, lots of things. First, I'll kind of define quantum supremacy because unfortunately in the pop science literature it can mean anything at this point.
Yeah.
But from the quantum community side, quantum supremacy means that you have enough logical qubits, or even in some cases noisy intermediate NISQ level qubits, that are more than the computational resources that any supercomputer could ever achieve. So if you had, let's say, 70 logical qubits, that is more compute than all of the supercomputers put together in the world today. There's another number that you should remember, which is that 300 logical qubits, you have more compute resources than if you assembled every atom in the universe into a supercomputer. Those are the kind of numbers that we talk about for quantum supremacy. Where now, if you talk about the different meaning of the word, which is that China has bigger quantum computers than we do, or they've achieved that goal of quantum supremacy, but they've scaled to the point where they can now operate what's called Shor's algorithm, which is what breaks all of the encryption systems that we use today. That is going to be a secret. They're not going to make that public. I do suspect that you'll see a handful of people there trying to get rich off of it, because with that scale of a quantum computer, you can actually calculate the private keys for cryptocurrency wallets. You can now steal Bitcoin and other things with that kind of a quantum computer. So you might see some of that being siphoned. More likely, they'll protect that for the most extraordinary applications, stealing military secrets, diplomatic communications channel, presidential communications, and all those things. And that will be silent for as long as they can possibly keep it. And then one day they'll reveal, oh, back in whatever, 2022, we had the largest quantum computer. Here's the physical proof that we have of things that we broke back then, and so on. But I suspect that will be quiet, whereas in the US, the first company that does that will have a global announcement, and their stock price will, triple what NVIDIA's is today.
Well, so that's an interesting way of trying to game through how this could play out. I think a lot of people naturally think if great cosmic power were to fall into the hands of a strategic adversary, they might want to do something dramatic. But there's a complete different way of thinking. Well, maybe they would like to watch and maybe warn here or there in a couple of strategic ways that we can reach out and touch something. and they might benefit more by that leverage than they would by some demonstration effect. They could do some damage that way.
Yeah,
So not less of a Pearl Harbor, but more of a slow sort of cooking of our goose.
I'll add an example in this case where you would never reveal your sources and methods. You might have a great collection requirement that might be the latest presidential discussion between superpowers. That will never trump protecting your sources and methods. And there's a very public example, which is still a fundamental unknowable. CISA themselves has researched this last year or 2 years, I can't remember. Microsoft's master signing key for all of their Office products, including for all the US government agencies, was somehow compromised. And China, the Salt Typhoon folks, were able to get into all of those accounts remotely. After over 2 years of research into how they did it, we still don't know how it happened. CISA published a very interesting report last year that this is unacceptable, that we have no idea how they did this. They must have had a technique that they're still protecting that we don't know yet, have not discovered, that they want to keep as long as they can to do it. Same thing to similar systems. That's exactly the example that we'll see with quantum computers. The other example is, you're probably familiar with Verizon, AT&T, and all of our big ISP backbones were compromised by the same group, where they were able to monitor that traffic. They were able to collect it, including who's connected to whom. Not only that, but also FBI's FISA coverage of what they were doing. They compromised that as well. So that took a long time to figure out that they were on those networks and harvesting the data already. And that's the exact same thing that we're going to see with quantum computers.
Well, as we sort of arc toward a wrap up of the conversation, we always ask questions about what role reciprocity can or should play in our dealings in China from whatever angle of vision. It strikes me that in the stark situation we find ourselves in, the development of post quantum encryption standards and this quantum compute race, uh, can we really get there with cooperation with China, or does it need to be a new Cold War where it's China on their side and we and our allies on the other side? And so, are we really in that kind of a realm, or could reciprocal principles allow us to walk in sync with one another? Maybe in the later Cold War, where we were trying to find détente and ways of engaging one another. But generally, how does reciprocity fit into your thinking of U.S. engagement with China as we tackle this challenge?
We have no reciprocity right now is the problem. We're in an asymmetric Cold War where the rules are different for our adversary here than they are for us. I gave you the example already that their intelligence services and their entire government infrastructure is set up as a criminal enterprise to steal IP and to monetize it for Chinese corporations, in which everyone profits there. If we change the laws here in the United States to uniquely be able to do this against our Chinese adversaries, meaning we can steal any IP or any data in China and give that to Google or Meta or whoever else to be able to monetize, that will change their perspective on it. We have way more to lose. We've been losing it for over 15 years now, but we need to do things like that where there's real consequences for them if they do not change their behavior.
Well, Dennis, this has been a joy to have this conversation. I think you've expanded our horizons in a lot of important ways. And I hope we can continue the conversation again, because I think we'll need several doses of this kind of encouragement, inoculation, to really kind of rally people to rise to this challenge. But before we go into our outro, where can people go to find your commentary, your research, the things that you're out there trying to push the world to pay attention to?
We publish a lot on our website. So under our resources, everything we've ever done, either research and development wise on quantum or cryptography, is there for public analysis and review. I do a lot of speaking, podcasts, testimony, and so on, to raise awareness of the problem. But it needs to be a lot more. I think people spend a lot more time distracted with social media and things that are inconsequential, rather than going onto YouTube or reading the news, search these terms, search quantum, search China, and so on. Get smart about this, at least for half an hour a week or something like that. That'll put you in a position, career-wise even, to be able to maybe get a job in this industry one day, even if you come from a completely different field. We don't need just quantum physicists working on the hardest level of the research problems in the lab. We need people that understand this for marketing. We need people who understand this for programming. We need people who understand this for building next generation security infrastructure. It's a collective, holistic problem that we have. And again, when people are distracted by these other get-rich-quick schemes, they're not focusing on their own future and the future of their children. I always say I don't want my kids to have to work for Huawei one day. I hope that company is always going to be Apple or somebody else that they aspire to. And if we don't change our behavior, we don't change our relationship with China, that's where this is going. I don't see it slowing down at all.
Well, Dennis, that's just simply an outstanding call to action to sum up the conversation. I thank you for that. And for our audience, if you've enjoyed today's conversation, please tell your friends, consider subscribing, and give a visit to the ChinaDeskPodcast.com. Thank you for joining, and thank you to Denis Mandich for sharing his perspective. Until next time, I'm Steve Yates, your host here at the China Desk.
Thank you for listening to the China Desk Podcast, presented by the Federal Newswire and hosted by Steve Yates. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream.